The microphones, I'm advised, have been turned on, and it is 9:15, so we will call this meeting to order. This is a meeting of the Economic Development Board, and we are here today to conduct our business in a new environment. This is, as I understand it, this is the first public meeting to be conducted by the city under the new circumstances that we're all dealing with. And it's important for you to know that the city has taken significant steps, I believe, in order to ensure that anyone who desires access to this meeting will have that access, will have the ability to witness or to look afterwards at the proceedings. The proceedings are being live streamed. People can we're obviously not at capacity in the room, reduced capacity, but there's still plenty here. But if it were the case that the room was filled and others were interested in witnessing the proceedings, I want the record to reflect that there is a live streaming process underway as we speak. So I've called the meeting to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Douglas Petty is not present. Richard Bradley?
Present.
Jeffrey Meyer?
Present.
Chairman Dwyer?
Present.
Gary Gunter is not present. Tracy Johnson is not
Present.
present. Oh, Tracy Johnson, thank you. Excuse me. I actually listed your name twice. And April Griffin?
Present.
Thank you. So a quorum of 5 is present, Chairman.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda, item number 3, is consideration to appoint or reappoint the chairman. So apparently the operating procedures put a time limit on the term of the chair, and so it is up to us today to elect a new chairman.
Chair Dwyer, if I may, I'd just like to make the comment that over the past year and a half, you've done an outstanding job as the chairman of this board, and I think most people here would reflect that. So with no further ado, I'd like to make a motion that we reappoint Chairman Dwyer for the coming year.
Second.
There is a motion and a second. Is there any discussion on that motion? I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Well, thank you for that vote of confidence. I will do my best to measure up. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes of our previous meeting, which was held on April 4th of last year. Those minutes were circulated in advance. I'm wondering if anyone has any comments regarding them, any corrections or additions. Hearing none, I will ask if there is a motion to approve the minutes as written.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Aye.
Thank you.
Second.
Further discussion? I will call.
And Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Where it says April the 4th, and then it says 20, what is that 20? Because I was thinking that meant 2020, which I said that couldn't, I'm thinking this meeting was last year, so.
I think it
maybe
was a
it's something.
typo. I saw the same thing.
I just wanted to,
Yeah. So, all right, we will,
that was corrected.
I will ask that that correction be made. Thank you for pointing that out.
Would the movement like to amend his motion to reflect the amended agenda?
I'm sorry?
Would the movement like to amend his motion to reflect the change in the minutes?
If you
I move approval of the minutes as amended.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
Thank you. I'll call the question again. All in favor of approving the minutes as amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries. The minutes are approved. We now move to the substance of today's meeting, and that is item number 5 on the agenda, budget items for consideration, the first of which is item A, transit.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I know we're all facing a lot of uncertainty and potentially hardship in our families right now, so
May I interrupt? You're probably familiar with this from your days on the board. Everyone who is going to speak, if you would identify yourself, so for our audience that is not here, they know who you are and what agency you're representing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, my name is Scott Ogilvie. I work in the Planning and Urban Design Agency, Transportation Policy Planner. Joining me in a little bit will be Jessica Mefford-Miller, who is CEO of Metro Transit. And so I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for being here today. So the first item, as you all know, the economic development sales tax has been accruing funding over the last several years into a transit fund dedicated to North Side, South Side transit. So the first item before you comes out of that 60% allocation within the economic development sales tax for North Side, South Side transit. The request is for $1.2 million to be utilized to conduct an alternatives analysis of the North Side, South Side project, which is the next step forward in our assessment of how to deliver high-quality transit within the North Side, South Side corridor. Some recent history and context to frame what we're doing here is that we've been taking a careful look at the 2018 North Side, South Side conceptual design study. This was a $2 million planning effort conducted to refine and update the North Side, South Side corridor project. This document was adopted by East West Gateway in 2018. The study assessed multiple local alignment options, set a specific alignment and station areas, and estimated a variety of things like project cost and ridership, and assessed technical feasibility in a number of areas and many other items. It's a large document. 2018 study also assessed supportive elements of the project, things like where you could acquire property to build a maintenance facility, impacts to parking, impacts to traffic, and on and on. The North Side, South Side conceptual design study also made a preliminary assessment of the eligibility of this project for FTA New Starts funding. The FTA New Starts program is the primary federal program that assists in funding new transit projects in the United States. The FTA New Starts program is an extremely competitive program for federal transit investment with an established scoring framework that assesses each project on a number of criteria like ridership, mobility enhancements, cost effectiveness per rider, land use, environmental benefits, and economic development. It's important to note that not all projects that are scored are eligible for funding, and not all projects that are eligible for funding immediately apply or receive funding. It's also important to emphasize that the New Starts program is discretionary. The FTA can and does exercise discretion in their own internal decision-making about which projects to advance through engineering and to funding awards. The assessment made in the 2018 conceptual design study determined this project was on the threshold for funding eligibility, and that assessment is something we all take very seriously. We have significant local funding, but we need to ensure that we can leverage that local funding to access funding within the New Starts framework. A final determination of the New Starts score would come later, once things like project costs are locked in. But it's important to note that the category where the project is scoring relatively low according to the FTA's criteria is cost effectiveness per rider and benefits produced for the project.
What was that last part, please?
Sure, let me go back. It's important to note that the category where this project is scoring relatively low in the FTA's criteria is cost effectiveness for the benefits produced and cost per rider, based on daily or annual ridership.
Thank you.
A second separate rating is made by the FTA to determine project eligibility based on local financial commitment to the project and fiscal health of the transit agency. This is an analysis of Bi-State's ability to operate and maintain a new project without a negative impact to the existing Bi-State bus and Metrolink system. The 2018 study did not make a full assessment of the operations and maintenance components of a new project or how the FTA would score that component, as it was considered too preliminary given that the project was too far into the future to assess Metro's financial health, several years out into the future. While a full assessment was not made, the study did suggest that another new revenue source would likely be required to fund operations and maintenance after a project was built. So that brings us to today, to the budget request today. Using some of the funds accrued within the transit category, we want to begin additional work, which we're calling an alternatives analysis, to determine a path to bring this project to fruition. So we will conduct this alternatives analysis. We're already working with Bi-State to develop a scope of work for the alternatives analysis. This is city funding, so BPS will issue the RFQ, request for qualifications. We'll select a team to do the work, and once selected, we want Bi-State to actually lead this project in close coordination with departments across the city of St. Louis. Bi-State are the experts in building and operating transit within the region, and we want to make sure that all of that existing local operational expertise is applied to this analysis. We would like to issue this RFQ sometime in April or May, then select and negotiate a contract with the team that would do the work, and then have them ready to start working as soon as possible once this funding is available in the new budget year. We learned a tremendous amount from the 2018 study, and that information continues to be relevant and inform ongoing decisions. We were able to determine important things like route alignment, stations, ridership estimates, cost estimates, technical feasibility, and what is called a minimum operable segment. There's a wealth of valuable information to build on from that study, but the study also pointed to real hurdles that need to be addressed before we can advance the project. With that in mind, this $1.2 million alternatives analysis is conceived of as a way to make progress and build on the 2018 study. And answer some of the questions that 2018 study left open. These are things like a thorough assessment of how we might close both the capital funding gap and the operations and maintenance funding gap, as well as an alternatives analysis looking at new and emerging technologies for vehicle propulsion and vehicle design to improve the cost competitiveness of the project, improve the probable FTA rating of the project, and ensure that it is eligible for federal funding in the future. We want to make sure every option is explored to ensure that we can make this project real. We feel both a sense of responsibility with this funding to maximize what it can do for transit riders, today's riders and tomorrow's riders within the North Side, South Side corridor. And we feel a sense of urgency to assess the best way to deliver improved transit service within the city of St. Louis. This funding authorization would be a step forward in meeting both that responsibility and that urgency. We took a big step forward in 2017 when we passed this economic development sales tax and allocated a significant portion to transit. We took another step forward with the 2018 study, and we're taking another step forward today down the path with this allocation for an alternatives analysis and an EIS in the future, which is the next line item. So I'll pause there. I can answer questions, or we can introduce Jessica Mefford-Miller.
Are there questions for Mr. Ogilvy? Yes.
Where can we access the 2018 study? Is it online?
Yes, so the entire 2018 study is on East West Gateway's website under corridor planning. If you just Google 2018 North Side, South Side Metrolink, or go to the East West Gateway site and look at corridor planning, it's there. It's broken into about 12 or 15 sections, or you can download the whole thing and uncompress it. It's a large document, and it covers a wide variety of aspects of the project. And there's, it takes a little while to go through, but it's a very valuable piece of work that we refer to a lot. And I think there's a lot of information to help understand how this project could work within that document.
Thank you.
Further questions? Thank you.
Thank you very much. With the next line item, dealing with an EIS. I'll be, I think, a little brief here, and then we'll invite Jessica Mefford-Miller up to talk about it a little more. So a required component of any FTA, Federal Transit Administration, New Start's funding application is an environmental impact statement. For a large transit project, that EIS is a very large document. And the level of detail involved in an assessment of it's a level of detail, it's an assessment of every single parcel of real estate within the transit corridor. Doing this work within the north side, south side corridor could be up to $6 million, which is a cost that was identified within the 2018 study. We want to allocate that funding now within this budget cycle, so it will be available when we have results from the alternative analysis, which we just spoke about. This aspect of project development, the environmental impact statement, it's a required component of any transit project, regardless of the exact details of the project. And sometimes details on those projects change within the EIS process. So at the conclusion of the alternatives analysis, which will happen at some point in 2021, it's conceivable that we'll be ready to move into the EIS phase. But we know, regardless, that we will be conducting an EIS for this project at some point in the future as a required component. So we feel it's sensible to allocate that money now so it is available and ready to go when we are ready to move into that phase. And we would use the same type of process of BPS selecting a consultant to do the work and Metro being the project lead, essentially, to manage that work when we get there. We do this in the spirit of looking forward and anticipating the next steps we need to take. And we don't want to accidentally run into a delay where we don't have the funding available when we would want to take that step. So those are the two line items under the transit category. I'd like to invite Jessica up now, and I'll step aside a little bit, but if you have questions, I'll be right here.
Thank you. Good morning.
Board members, I'm Jessica Mefford-Miller. I'm our Executive Director of Metro Transit. I am delighted to be here this morning to talk about what we can collectively do to advance high quality, high capacity, and high speed transit in the St. Louis metropolitan region, namely along a north-south corridor in the city of St. Louis. I applaud the efforts of city staff to construct this planning and design program in such a way that we can expeditiously advance the pursuit of federal funding and ultimately the implementation of high investment transit on that north side, south side corridor. As Mr. Ogilvie mentioned, that alternatives analysis is going to build upon that conceptual design study from 2018. It also will build upon and draw from a transit-oriented development planning study conducted by Bi-State in partnership with the city of St. Louis that concluded in late 2019. With this work, what we aim to do in the alternatives analysis is to refine our understanding and design of the project such that we're improving our score with cost effectiveness and with that cost per passenger and with positive economic development impacts. We know we have to do this if we are going to be competitive for federal funding. I would note that within the St. Louis region, we have not built any of our major transit investments using the New Starts process. We did a little bit different process with the original Metrolink alignment and subsequent expansions, and our most recent expansion, the Blue Line, which opened in 2006, was supported 100% locally. As a region, it would be very difficult for us at this time and for the foreseeable future to construct significant transit infrastructure investments without the participation of federal funding. And so we are working to deliver a project design that is financially sustainable and that is economically and socially sustainable and equitable. And that really is the point of that alternatives analysis and the environmental impact statement process. Through both of these processes, we would advance the design of the projects. We would be looking to reduce the cost and efficiency. Some of the big cost items include operating facility, real estate or right-of-way, vehicles, and associated technology. Every day, every year, technology and mobility and transit are evolving, and we want to ensure that we are targeting the right tools to deliver high-quality transit service that we can afford to sustain and maintain in addition to our existing operations, and that are going to be competitive at a national scale. So we are not competing locally for funds here, but we are competing against our peer cities from across the country. That environmental impact statement goes much deeper, looking at the economic and the social impacts of any expansion project. We do environmental impact statements for all of our major transit projects. They're often rated with a lower level of requirement, like a categorical exclusion. So we don't have to go through as much rigor for a project like expanding our Civic Center Transit Center in recent years, because we were building on the footprint of existing transit infrastructure. This is much different in that we would be building new transit infrastructure. Are there any questions about the detail or the rigor of either the alternatives analysis or the environmental impact statement? And I do want to assure you that the team at Metro has been working very closely with staff at the City of St. Louis. I think we've got a good team assembled, and we are prepared to accept this work should the board approve to entertain this motion.
Thank you. So let me ask first if there are any questions from this side of the table. No? Ms. Griffin? Questions?
Oh, yes. When I look at how we can move people, and I think about what we have currently, does this, as Metro and as others are currently looking at this north-south corridor, does it require that we use light rail, that we use trolleys? What alternatives could there be? Because if the goal is to improve transit along that corridor, I could see a number of possibilities, and I'm wondering what kinds of possibilities have been considered.
So in order to do our due diligence at the alternatives analysis phase, our team would likely be examining a range of different technologies. We would expand, in terms of light rail, that's been taken to the conceptual design level by the recent conceptual design study. We would be revisiting some elements of that, like propulsion systems, for example, and really fine-tuning our understanding where we would have to have infrastructure in place, like overhead catenary systems for propulsion, or where we may be able to have onboard storage systems for batteries running the train, so without the overhead infrastructure, if that makes sense. We would also be exploring other alternatives, including a high level of investment of something like bus rapid transit. Another alternative that is typically compared would be an enhanced version of what you have operating in that corridor today, so that would be an enhanced frequent-based bus service. And in every alternatives analysis, there's also a no-build scenario. So you would be weighing the costs and benefits of each of those levels of investment against one another and against that no-build scenario. So those are just the kinds of questions, Mr. Meyer, that we would be answering.
Okay, because I didn't know if there was a certain mindset that kind of looked at this as one particular method of moving people and everything was based on that, or whether you could say, well, if we have an extensive system of sensors, we have fiber optic cable, we have 5G capability, we could have electric buses that could have the ability to move rapidly because of the timing that would be possible with a traffic grid that allowed them, based on the normal timing of when passengers, would be getting on board. And you might have different lines along the same corridor, a green line and a red line or something like that, where if someone was on one corner and they missed the red line bus, they could go to the next block where there was a green line bus that would be coming more quickly, and you could have your traffic signals set up such that you could really move buses practically as rapidly as you move Metrolink trains now, something like that.
Yeah, So some of those ideas are exactly why we would conduct this alternatives analysis, to make sure that, the overriding principle is high quality, high frequency, rapid transit within this corridor that meets the needs of people and businesses in that corridor today. But right now, 2020, there's a lot going on within the realm of transit across the world, and it makes sense to build on that study with the deeper analysis of what all of our options are to make sure we can build a great project within a reasonable amount of time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Additional questions? All right,
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
And then, did that cover both the environmental impact study and the transit funds to remain available for future appropriation, or is there a separate discussion to be had on that third item?
Well, I guess we could briefly say that, so between the alternatives analysis and the EIS, that totals $7.2 million. The remaining funding, much as it has in previous years, would just continue to accrue into the transit fund and be available in the future to actually construct a project.
That's what I wanted to get into the record, so thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you very much.
And Mr. Chair, maybe I missed this, what about the subsidy transit?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
Well, we've got three items. I see transit study, environmental impact study, and subsidy for transit. And there's 5.4 million requested.
That's what we were just discussing.
Yeah,
I thought that was the environmental impact
No,
study.
we moved beyond that.
Oh.
My question was, what about that third category?
so yes, the term Mr. Meyer sees there in the budget, subsidy, that's a budget division term that just means it'll continue to accrue
Right.
for the project in the future.
I have one question about procedure, and that is whether there is any intention for periodic updates for public consumption about the progress of these projects.
Yeah, so within the alternatives analysis, there will certainly be a public engagement component of that. And, we hope to have, be working on that in 2020 and late summer. And so I think that's would be probably the appropriate forum because we'll be creating new information via that analysis that we can share with the public and solicit feedback from the public on.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, may I ask one quick question? So your total allocation, your total request today is the $12,660,000?
Yes.
Exactly, across the three categories, yes, and $12,660,000 is the total within the overall transit category.
Thank you.
Thank you. So unless there's objection, I would propose that we vote on the three line items collectively as in a single motion. Is there any objection to that? Then I will ask if there is a motion to act favorably to approve the proposal for $12,660,000 in the transit category as just discussed.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Thank you. Second. Any further discussion? I will call the question. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. Thank you. That was an excellent presentation, and it really, the sense I got is that there really is a professional level and collaborative approach going on, and that is really encouraging. So thank you both for that.
Chairman, may I point out that Ms. Russell is here?
Yes, good. So as discussed informally before the meeting was called to order, it was agreed that we would move to item number 3 on the agenda, workforce development.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm going to pass out a brief report just to let you know what your
Thank you.
original allocation of funds have yielded in terms of those projects that were considered under the Youth Housing Services programs.
Keep in mind as you're speaking that you're not, there you go, now you're on the record. Good, thank you.
Good morning.
And would you identify yourself, please?
Valerie Russell with the City of St. Louis Department of Human Services, recently appointed director. I am here to talk to you about the Youth Empowerment Services programs that your dollars funded in FY19, as well as to request funding for the FY 2021 program year. What I've provided to you is the monitoring report on those 9, actually you have 8 entities listed, subcontractors who were awarded funding to do a wide variety of pilot projects for youth between the ages of 16 and 24. Throughout the year 1 of those contracts, they have received both the fiscal monitoring, and a programmatic monitoring. What we've provided to you is a scale so that you will see the status of those monitorings and whether or not we had any concerns about moving forward for their year 2 pilots. I know you don't have time to go through this entire report right now, but I can tell you that we have met with each of the subcontractors. We have discussed with them changes that may be made in their year 2 pilots, and with your approval, we will award year 2 pilot projects to those entities, and I can tell you what those recommendations would be in terms of the dollars. So we're looking at FY19 funds, in which there were 2 allocations awarded. We awarded funds for the FY19. They had been coupled, I believe, with 18 and 19. So we will be doing new awards to those entities. Their contracts already extend through 2021, so we don't have to do a revised contract. We will negotiate on budget. So any expenditures from those contracts that have not been expended as of April 30th, 2020, we will roll over into FY21. Their allocation may be what they requested. However, we intend to make certain that whatever dollars are unspent from those 2 pilot years, we will do one of 2 things depending upon the nature of their project and their performance. One, we will do a no-cost extension for those so that they can expend those dollars and continue to serve youth until those dollars end, or we will de-obligate those dollars if in year 2 they are not meeting their goals. As you can see right now, all of them are. We have some concerns about the fact that with the school closings and the issue with social distancing, they are not operating now. So for the last 2 months of their contract, they will not be seeing clients. So we want to be fair. The FY20 allocation that you provided to us approval for, we received in FY19 27 applications for funding. Of those, only 9 were funded. It is our intent to bring the review committee back together to look at those projects who got a rating of 28 or more, to ask if they are in a position to stand up a project going from 2020 to 2021. If they are, then we will be negotiating contracts with them to provide services that were not awarded or provided in the current pilots. What I'm asking for today is your approval and consideration for an allocation in FY 2021 for funds not yet appropriated in the amount of $1,144,217. Those dollars will provide for all new requests for proposals for projects that have not yet been funded, for proposals that we've not received, and to look at what kinds of gaps we have in the full array of services that we intended to fund when we came before you the first time with the design for those particular youth empowerment services programs. I can entertain any questions you may have.
Are there any questions? I just want to clarify. I'm sorry if I wasn't paying sufficient attention, but I just want to make sure that that in your presentation you covered both line items, the $1,889,000.
The 1,889 goes to Slate.
grants.
And so that's a separate presentation.
Separate presentation.
So-
I am just speaking of the Director of Human Services Youth Empowerment Program grants.
Yeah, so we're only dealing,
Director Howard is here and will be speaking on this slate.
and you're prepared to speak next, is that correct? Yes, Mr. Chair. Good, thank you. All right, I just wanted to clarify that.
I understand. Thank
So,
you.
And I think, unless there is objection, and it could be on your part as well, but I think that procedurally, I would propose that we wait until we've heard the presentation on the slate part of this category, and then we vote on
I have no
the two
objections.
collectively. Is there any objection to that? Right, thank you. That's the way we'll proceed. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members, good morning.
Good morning.
I am Howard Hayes, Executive Director of Slate. I come to you this morning for assistance because, as many of you know, Slate is fully funded through our grants. We do not receive general revenue from the city of St. Louis. The grants by purpose have a very small margin. The majority of the funds are designed to be placed in the hands of small businesses throughout the city that we work with on a consistent basis, and of course, training and development dollars for, we call them our clients, but actually they're citizens of St. Louis. The overall task for us would be to use the funds to create a high-performing rapid response team capable of responding to workforce needs anywhere in the city. These are difficult times that we are facing right now, but even before that, the JW aluminum plant at South Broadway in May, long before the C-19 event, they are to lay off almost 200 workers. We need the resources to respond and coordinate with the state in a very comprehensive manner. In addition, we would like to have the $1.8 million allocated over several categories: vendors, programs, salaries, consultants, and expanding our operations. One of the things I've found, and I've been executive director for about 6 months, is that there have been delayed investments in terms of people, process, and technology. We are one of 14 centers around the state of Missouri. Many of them have relationships throughout the region that they draw resources from. We have not developed those yet. We want to use these funds to create items such as regional business work opportunities to come in, meet our clients, meet with the mayor, meet with other leaders, so that, just a story, coming to this position, I read about 7 economic development plans, and Slate was front and center in all of them. There is a key place for Slate to play in this region. We have not lived up to that, but we will with your help, and we're asking for that. If you look at our allocations, one of them, salaries, an attorney. Slate is probably one of the most complicated agencies we have in terms of state, federal, and local regulations. Also, we want to make sure that we reach throughout the city. As of now, and I'm sure it's changing as we speak, and an anecdote for you is that just yesterday, those that are being laid off because of the virus are beginning to come into our center, and it is an amazing transition in just a couple of weeks. But for us, we believe that complete outreach is necessary. We have pockets in North St. Louis that have definitely exceeded what some would say is a 4.0 unemployment rate. We believe in certain neighborhoods it may be as high as 20%, and this is before the layoffs which are planned and coming. So we need your help to accomplish this. We look at centers across the country that are using mobile centers so that we can appear in neighborhoods that have high poverty, high crime, and need our assistance. We also want to increase the level of technology for our staff. None of our team should meet someone in a neighborhood and say, come to Slate, I'll get back with you. They are in immediate need. We need to have technology, websites that we can help them on the spot. So those are just some of the items we want to use the funds for. And again, we find that working with the Department of Labor, federal agencies throughout Washington, we need the assistance from time to time of nationally recognized consultants. Also, we look at our team having training dollars so that they can be the best workforce that the city can put in the field. And so that's kind of an overview for you, and I will entertain any questions that you have.
Are there any questions?
Just one. Can you tell me, so from the positions that you have listed, have you hired most of these already, and this is just continual funding for them? Or are these new positions?
The public information officer would be a new position for our outreach. The program coordinator would be a new position so that with the various departments, I would have, as the executive director, someone that could bring in information to me and intel on a consistent basis. The attorney is existing, administrative assistant 2 is existing, the employment and training specialist 3 is open.
Thank you.
Mr. Meyer?
I noticed that for fiscal year 2020, the employment and training specialist is listed at 102,000, but there's nothing listed for this fiscal year. You're not going to allocate funds for it?
Yes, we intend to allocate funds for the employment and training specialists, but we are redesigning the team right now based on consultants coming in to say these are best practices around the region.
Okay, because I noticed that the administrative assistant 2 was listed in the fiscal year 2020 at 51,000 and then nothing for 2021. So that's the same kind of thing. You are kind of reorganizing how you do things?
Yes, we have been in consultation with our partners at the state and federal level, coming up with the most high-performing, most efficient model.
Okay. Now, this is a question that speaks back to last year. Last year, we were told that there would be a tab on the Slate website where it would go into some of the things that are being done. And has that been implemented to your knowledge, that tab?
We have had significant improvements in our website, but we also want to use some of the funds and this is, the new regulations require that the Slate website be accessible in new ways that require upgrades. And so even though we've been in a major transition period in terms of staff reorganization, program reorganization for the last 6 months of my tenure, there is still much to do, and we do need your help, Mr. Meyer.
Okay. And I'm wondering, do many of the people who come through Slate are many of them later hired by the city?
We have an ongoing program that we've had for several years that in the summer, the city will hire for the workers that do maintenance with the grass cutting and that type of thing. We do have partnerships with Mr. Frank at the Department of Personnel so that our teams are aware of openings with the city. We want them to find jobs. We want to clearly reduce the openings that we have here, but often we have some very sophisticated openings with the city of St. Louis, and they require training. And we use a lot of our federal dollars to provide training for them. So we look at them all as, if not today, we encourage you to be a future city of St. Louis employee.
Okay, because when I think about all of the city jobs that are open, because we haven't been able to attract people, and so therefore we're, in many departments, we will hear that we are short on personnel. And I think, well, if we could utilize the program
Yes.
that you run and maybe attract people through that program to get training and then go to work for the city.
One of our ideas, we will meet with all the department heads to find out exactly what their needs are and the requirements for those positions. We do see a bit of a sea change, though, with the city going to the $15 per hour minimum wage. And so that has been a tool that we can use also to grow workforce.
Okay, thank you.
Questions? Yes.
Yeah, I had a question. A good portion of the money is listed under operations, a little over $1 million. What does operations entail?
Again, I mentioned the capability of a virtual one-stop workforce center. It is strange because Slate has been around since the 70s, but as a young boy growing up in North St. Louis, I'd never heard of it. And so we want to create a mobile van, perhaps, that would spend time in our neighborhoods, in our churches, in our community centers, and it would have the technology capability that someone could walk in, learn resume preparation, job search, et cetera. We love our location here in downtown St. Louis, but from time to time, reaching our residents is a little difficult. Also, there are technology-based web assessment tools that are good for our clients as well as our businesses. For example, Telefy. We have clients that can find out what their achievement is in terms of math, science, and once those scores are recorded in that portal, then businesses can look for employees that would be of use to their companies. And so technology, communication materials, we mentioned the annual workforce event for businesses. We need your help now, but we want to be self-sustainable, and the best way to do that is to build strong relationships with the existing business community. So we will use some of those funds to convene major workforce centers around the city.
Okay.
Is that responsive to your question? Thank you. Any additional questions for Mr. Hayes? And I will ask whether there is a motion to approve the sum of $3,033,369 for the two categories under workforce development, item number 3.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Second?
Thank you. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I will call the question. All those in favor of the motion to approve, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
And those opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Mr. Chairman, members, thank you from all of us at Slate.
Thank you. We will now move back to item number 2 on the agenda, neighborhood revitalization. Mr. Rowe.
morning, everybody. Good morning. I'm Don Rowe, the Executive Director of the Planning and Urban Design Agency, one of your more frequent visitors in these many sessions. Towards that end, I want to thank the members of this committee that also joined me and others at an evening meeting held by the Board of Aldermen in January, where much of this allocation and the result of this tax money was spoken. So thank you for participation in that. I just noted that Mr. Hayes was talking about Slate being around since the 1970s, so I'm going to just add, I've been around in St. Louis since the 1980s, having been a transplant here, and the Planning and Urban Design Agency was commenced in 1999, but during that time, been engaged in planning in various capacities, including tracking and participating in every effort that we've done towards light rail and transit improvements. So I'm pretty excited that, one, Scott Ogilvie has joined my staff, two, that the work that you've just seen and approved in your budget is coming forward from us. It is structured to be regimented in that we're moving forward with getting to quality transit implemented in an affordable way, with light rail being the basis that we've done this reporting and looked at that alignment. But there will be emerging technologies and other technologies tire-kicked as that goes forward. I thought I should do just a little housekeeping, given how we've had the discussions about these votes. I am doing item number 2, which has 2 broad numbers associated with it, and then one total number that it was the $4.3 million ask.
You just bumped up your request? It's $4,120,000.
Yeah, I did not bring my reading glasses, so you can catch me on that.
That was not very subtle.
But to join me on that, Executive Director of the St. Louis Development Corporation, Otis Williams, I'll bring him up in a little bit, but I will also speak, therefore, on the items that are directly with PDA. Some of those items I want you to consider that will be like we talked about transit. It will go through PDA and be joined and participated in with the St. Louis Development Corporation. Then I'll also speak about that allocation that's allocated to the Community Development Administration, or CDA. So with that, I want to talk about a couple things, both a little bit in the past and 2 on the future. The process of doing neighborhood planning in the city of St. Louis actually was my first job as a consultant with the city. We did 13 neighborhood plans, and planning in neighborhoods has not been quite as structured as one would like, because we have 79 neighborhoods, they don't all have a plan. As a result of this tax money, they will all have a plan over a course of some time. Moving from the position where we haven't had funding for doing neighborhood plans organized through the city to having this tax money has been a transition that we're doing and structuring in as most professional manner as we can. And that includes that it will be resources both in-house staff, key, that's most of the planning staff was laid off some 25 years ago. So we will add more staff. We've been very conscious of that. And that we will be using services and by empowering neighborhoods, but also getting consultants. So that's sort of a broad thing to be thinking about, that you'll see that my allocation and request is for staffing and for services that would come from consultants. Staffing, we are a city agency. We are a civil service employment system, meaning all our hiring goes through that process. It's a challenge these days. There's hundreds of open positions to get employees. I rarely do this at a weekly meeting I have with the mayor, but in January, I told her I was the most excited that day that I had been in a long time, because I had made a recent hire using the economic development, the sales tax money, for an executive assistant to do the administrative aspects of the work we're doing. Why that is important, without that, all the stuff that we're trying to do in terms of organized planning and get ready for this program also had needs that we needed to structure the program, but the administration of doing the budget and doing the hiring was a stretch to do. She was hired in January, so that's terrific. Her first task, among other things, in terms of budgeting, was to get this budget for you, and her next task is now to be my chief liaison into the hiring process through the city's personnel system. Welcome thing. So that executive system is on board. As we've talked about, the program will be that we're gearing up to do multiple neighborhoods each year. And neighborhood planning these days is not to be taken lightly. And that, maybe I just made a pun because that is, of course, a heavy document. But it also means it's more comprehensive than just land use and physical development. Includes things such as concerns for youth employment and concerns things about other types of neighborhood activities. This is one that we did, and we partnered with the community of the Graveway Jefferson area, RISE, to produce, and we adopted it as a city plan. Adopting it as a city plan is concerned. We've used this partly as a model for the program that we're going to move forward. You've met previous meetings, Cecilia Dvorak, that works for me, that's been helping do that. We are actively also in partnership with RISE, but our prototype community that we're working on right now is a neighborhood plan with RISE, the neighborhood in the West End neighborhood, which is north of Del Mar at the city limits. That we're using as a pilot and testing and evaluating a lot of things, many of which goes to the community participation aspect of what we're doing. These are to be neighborhood-driven plans with us helping to facilitate and getting to certain standards. So towards that end, one of the things you also see in my line item is we're asking for more and more focus on being able to get the right technologies to do things. So one of the things we've purchased and been using in the West End neighborhood is keypad polling devices. So keypad polling, where you go to, it's not just newsprint and marker, you present something on the screen, and then the technology is that we can distribute for people. People can respond to a question that's on the screen through their phones or through a handout device that's a little bit of a keypad. Those are very enabling of what we want to do. Technology is increasing daily as to how to outreach and work with citizens. So that's all in very much of the mix that what we're doing and spending our money on. The split I'll do in a second is turn it over to Otis to talk about one of the things that was funded last year and the next steps is the economic development strategy, the equitable economic development strategy for the city. Doing that, I will talk to him, let him speak about his two items that are within the PDA budget that will be worked through to him. One is a consulting work called under the economic development strategy. The other is for LRA marketing and services under Project NS. Let me just say a little bit more about the neighborhood planning, and I have a handout I'm going to give you about one of the things that we've been doing in preparation is interviewing people and stakeholders around the city as to how to do it best. That's a key thing. And then we have two other strategies as to what are the best practices nationally, and then what our deployment will be. I have realized that one of the things that's been short is making sure we have enough management horsepower to run this staff. That's indeed important to me, that we have enough continuity to run our staff. And there's a lot of variables that go on in that hiring process. There's a lot of variables in terms of what we want to have as specialized availability for the neighborhoods. So the consulting budget is also included in our mission for neighborhood planning consultants. We will be using them in a variety of ways to help the neighborhoods for specialized techniques, market studies, things of that nature. And also, as we're looking out there, the neighborhoods are in different levels of preparedness, and some of them now are trying to do activities that are just sort of a subset of a plan with consultants, and we hope to be able to provide some of those to them. Just to be in another umbrella of the 79 neighborhoods, a number of those neighborhoods are within the Project Connect area, which is a key focus area around NGA and has a certain status in cities' efforts there. And downtown consists of 2 neighborhoods in our rubric, and they're engaged in a plan that they're participating with planning and urban design, but not using this funding to do. The other thing about the consultants is we are helping in the most recent efforts of planning, such as this one, to take some things to the next step, which are developing things like form-based codes, which implements neighborhood plans. So with that, I'd be certainly happy to answer questions. The second part is I would like at one point for Otis to come up and talk about the 2 things that he's requesting. Any manner of way that you'd like to do that, Mr. Chairman.
Let's see if there are questions for you and your presentation. I'll start on the right side of the table. Are there any questions on this side? Yes, Ms. Griffin?
So does this funding replace funding that you were receiving previous years through the city? When I see different salaries in here and operations in here, or are you still getting any funds from?
So I'll answer that in 2 ways, because you said previously, our budget at one time was $2.7 million that came entirely from block grant. We're now totaling about $1.5 million from block grant and other general revenue. These are all, these are new positions. They're not, it's not a transfer of just a year ago, they were on another budget, and they're on this budget. No, it's in my big picture world, it's bringing us back to how we were in a period many.
The scale back and then all the people you lost and stuff. So will you still receive money from block grant to help fulfill your budget, and will you still be receiving money from the other sources?
Yeah,
such as general revenue?
our budget is fairly complicated. We receive now general revenue funding. We receive this funding. We receive a small portion in comparison to previous years of community development block grant funding. We have a couple positions that are matched from other funding. For instance, we get State Department of Conservation funding to help fund a consultant working on green spaces in North St. Louis. And then, believe it or not, we get another little portion of CDA funding on a poor performance basis. So you now will cycle back to saying why I'm particularly happy that I have an administrative person that deals with all that budgeting now. So, but no, we're not swapping out current salaries
So we'll get
with
the
this
support
money.
that
This
you
is
need.
new initiative.
But fully
Yeah.
funded back up,
Yeah.
get staffed back up and be fully funded. Okay.
Questions on this side of the table? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I did. Maybe I wasn't clear. I mean, maybe I didn't understand. What neighborhoods are you focused on?
So, good. Why that I say that is we have a focus right now on the West End neighborhood that we're using as a pilot in our first phase with this, with RISE, with the community, and helping that, to format what our program will be. We're going through an entire evaluation matrix as to what neighborhoods will be in the program in an early year and a subsequent year. And that's still a work in progress. There's a couple things that indicate neighborhoods that will be high in that. The Jeff Vanderloo neighborhood is one of those. It also abuts into the Project Connect area. That triage and status of how we're doing that is the big thing that we're wrestling with right now.
So what I heard you say is your focus is the West End.
A current project that we're working on in partnership with the community is the West End.
Okay.
The West End neighborhood, north of Del Mar, east of the city limits. Yeah.
Questions on this side?
So the West End neighborhood, that's the 26th ward?
Yes.
Okay. And, one of the complaints, I'm sure you're well aware from the people on the Board of Aldermen, is that we get a lot of development through the Central Corridor. We joked about how, you're sitting in Alderman Rohde's chair because there's been a lot of development, for example, in his ward. And he has talked about how, in his experience, if you can get one project, and then sometimes that turns into another project and another, and so it kind of snowballs and builds. So are we looking at trying to help some of the neighborhoods to develop a plan so that they can then move forward in the 3rd Ward, the 4th Ward, the 5th Ward, the 21st Ward, so that we're going along this north-south corridor that this money, I always have the feeling that what we're trying to do is really help develop along this north-south corridor.
So that's one of the factors in sort of weighing where we go, but I want to be sort of emphatic, is that the city is divided into 79 neighborhoods. They're the building blocks of our city. And many of them have seen the good fortune of development. Some of them have some planning efforts from the past. Some of them have initiated some planning efforts, and like this West End, we're helping and participating with that one. But all of them need a plan. And getting them and helping them in a strategic way to leverage other things that might be on the horizon that are, by the nature, either a project or an activity like North-South Metrolink, is all sort of key to, then we have a roadmap adopted for that neighborhood with neighborhood participation, with anticipations of what's going on out in the community. So, key. I smile at the word ward because really we're working in those neighborhoods, and of course aldermen are implementers and helpfuls to help to follow this roadmap, but it's a neighborhood thing.
Okay, and I noticed, like, when I look at SLDC's website,
Okay.
and I notice there are various boards and things that are
Right.
listed under there.
Yeah.
And I think to myself, where is this board? Where do we exist anywhere under the city's website? Because I don't see anything, and I thought, well, should we be under SLDC since we're an economic development board?
So I'll make a comment about that, then I'll think,
Sure.
Todd, we can respond to that in a more subsequent way. My agency is on the city website as the Planning and Urban Design Agency,
Right.
and not as part of the St. Louis Development Corporation
Right.
subset of the city's website. So, I mean, I think it's an open question if there's some need to have you listed on the city website in some place that you are and we're not finding it, or have a link to SLDC. We'll talk about it with Todd and Otis.
Yeah, because I know when I look, if you want to see videos, for example, or audios or whatever of meetings, you'll see the Planning Commission and different things like that. And I think, well, how do we find this group? Because I Googled it and I found one on YouTube or something, but it was like, well, shouldn't we have that same kind of thing?
Good idea. We'd love to have that transparency.
There is
We'll figure out a
pressure.
way to.
I'm thinking back to the meeting that you referred to at the outset of your presentation, which was when, the meeting in this room?
Oh, in January.
It was in January. So at that meeting, Alderwoman Ingracia made the point, I believe, either at the meeting or subsequent to it, that she believes that this body that we're on should have website presence. I don't know what the status of that is, or whether she thinks it's our responsibility or someone else's, but in any event, that point has been made.
Sure. Another question I have, where can I find the economic development strategy, the
So,
report?
we'll bring Otis up and he'll talk about that.
Okay, thank you.
So there have been about a dozen references to Otis.
Yeah, so,
But before we do that, I have a question. I do not want to put you on the spot with this, but I would, to the extent that you can answer this comfortably, I would appreciate your insight into both the status of and the perhaps quality of the planning process in the West End.
oh, cool. It goes back to one of the things we talked about early on with this committee, is also working on preparing neighborhoods to have a planning process. And that neighborhood is one that has funding from the St. Louis Foundation. We're working with the St. Louis Foundation in one of our partnership roles to develop our strategy as to where to go, as to what they've been doing in empowering. So I've been to a couple meetings, but not all of the meetings. I was impressed by the very first one, which certainly included a number of RISE employees helping it along, but it also included a banner coming from the Cornerstone folks. So the public meetings have been quite robust, but it's one of those groups where we need to nurture and continue.
It's my impression as well that that is a robust process,
Yeah.
and I wanted to hear your thoughts about it. And the reason it interests me is that, or one reason it interests me, is that if it's done well, and the perception in the community is that it was well done, then perhaps that becomes the model for, as you have suggested, the model for other neighborhoods.
Yep.
And maybe the inspiration as well, not just the model, but, okay, they were able to do it, and here's what it took to do to accomplish something worthwhile.
What it took to do, what the spirit had to be to do it, too,
Exactly.
and the energy. So the two things, one thing in particular comes to mind is, two things come, is one of the first endeavors, and talk about technology, but also talk about people, was a Saturday morning where community volunteers were gathered, and using an iPhone app or provided tablet, people went out in pairs and did an evaluation of blocks that were familiar to them, blocks that were allocated to them on a map. Happens to be now that some SLU students are filling in some of the gaps that weren't able to be done in that day. So that gets people thinking about, oh yeah, that vacant building. Second is, just a couple weeks ago, I went to a neighborhood meeting north of the West End that was gathered just in general about development and better family life. And a woman from the West End spoke and talked about what was going on in her neighborhood with all those sort of advocacy and support roles of seeing how, it was being embraced. So, cool stuff.
Great, thank you. Okay.
Can I ask another question? Last year, I think you mentioned that there were 3 neighborhoods that you were focusing on, and I think the West End may have been one of them, and maybe they then became the pilot. What's going on with the other 2?
We've been doing, good point, we've been doing efforts with others in the Wells Goodfellow neighborhood. That effort, when we talk about the Department of Conservation providing some services, it's not a full-blown neighborhood planning effort, but it's looking at one of the components of vacancy, which is looking at creating green space as an amenity in the neighborhoods. We're doing that. A touch of that is also happening in the College Hill neighborhood, and those are the 3 that I really say the prototype, the real pilot, is the West End. As I say, there's a couple things that keep being emerging that we want to help. The Skinkett of Oliver neighborhood, where we adopted a plan just prior to this one with money that had been provided by WashU and others, have a step that they're doing to put in a form-based code. And so a form-based code is a logical step from planning, and we're helping them. All those get to be, we don't want to say no, all those get to be sort of prototypical snapshots of things that we'll do in the greater good in these comprehensive neighborhood plans.
Okay, so as we work through the process in those neighborhoods, we can then use what we learn there to go into some of the other neighborhoods and help them to, because I think some of the neighborhoods just, they have no way of coming to the point where they're planning and all that because they don't have resources, they're not organized.
And we'll talk about that a bit after Otis comes up and speaks about his 2 line items. So, Mr. Chairman, if,
Thank you.
okay.
So thank you for your patience.
Thank you all very much. I'm Otis Williams. I'm the Executive Director for the St. Louis Development Corporation, the city's economic development arm. Thanks to Don for introducing the topic, and also we'll provide maybe sort of a brief update on where we are with the current economic development framework that is going on, the strategy that is going, that you all funded last year. And so we have been ongoing. We were able to secure through a competitive process a consulting team led by Mass Economics. Teresa Lynch is the lead person there, but the sub-consultants on that team include Interface Studios and Tony Griffin, who worked with American Cities, and one other person that I'm missing. Well, Scott is Interface, but I'm thinking of Gerald. Yeah. So it's very good team, and the one good thing about this team is that many of the members of this team are also working other major studies that are ongoing. For instance, the Great Rivers Greenway project that was ongoing. Some of the members on this team were also on that team. The Downtown STL also has a ongoing study. Interface Studios is leading that, but they have as self-consultants a couple of members of this team. So there's a lot of synergy going on so that we can ensure that there is some crossover with all of the things that we're about to do. So we've gone through a year's effort of public input, a lot of interactions. We have about a 45-person advisory board that meets, that have met frequently to provide input. We are in the process of reviewing a final draft report that will be circulated for further review to others. The staff and the advisory committee are involved in doing that. And so, but for the ongoing crisis, we were looking to try and have the final product by the end of April. And so we may adjust just a few weeks, just given where we are, so that we can have a formal rollout on what the findings are. So the reason I'm here is to speak to the ongoing effort of the community planning, if you will, neighborhood planning, that it will be going around the NGA site. And so this is a continuation of what Don has set the stage for, which is planning in all of the neighborhoods. But one of the things that we did when we sought and were successful in retaining the NGA is that we made several promises. And one of those, the 3 promises that we made, one that we would, get a site that was large enough to retain them and prepare that and deliver it. They're constructing, they have started construction there already. The second one was that we would address the infrastructure to be able to get people there. And that included the interchange at Jefferson, upgrades to Jefferson Avenue, and a number of things which led to the availability of land for what now will be the MLS Stadium site. But also the streets are in and around the neighborhood. There are a total of about 11 potential projects that would be there. Total investment, including the state's investment in this, is about $180 million. So we think we have a path forward for the infrastructure. About 52 million of it is already funded, and Rich's staff is leading the efforts on the city streets, and MoDOT is working the interchange, and we're also working to get designed Jefferson Avenue as well. So the third promise, though, was that we would then help to transform the neighborhood around it, or to help work with the neighborhoods that were around the NGA site. And so one of the things that we're asking with this request is that we will be able to provide planning around those neighborhoods being Carr Square, St. Louis Place, Old North, and Jeff Vanderloo. I think, did I get it?
Chairman?
And Columbus Square, I'm sorry.
I had a request that from the technical department that either they can't hear. So if you could raise the mic or speak a little bit louder
Okay,
for our recording purposes, thank you.
all right, so, I'm sorry about that. So I don't know where I was now. Okay, so the 5 neighborhoods, I added Columbus Square. So we had 5 neighborhoods that we were looking to have planning for. And so we are working to secure a consultant to be able to accomplish this. And so we would ask your approval of the amount requested here. The second item on the agenda, you can ask me questions about both, is I think it's the $290,000 that's there. As you know, we are working with the other city departments to implement Project NS. And so the funding there would help us to accomplish that, along with working with the building division specifically to help with some of the staffing that they may need to help get Project NS up and going.
Would you do a 2-sentence description so that everyone is on the same page about what the NS project is?
Okay, so the Project NS is a project that was passed by the voters and essentially will provide funding. I think the total amount that will be raised over the life of the program is about $40 million, I think what was anticipated. And on an annual basis, amount of money will be coming into the budget that the city is working to have bonded such that we can move forward in securing funds. But essentially, it is to up to 200 homes, up to 200 properties, buildings would be secured, sort of mothball, if you would, and not more than $30,000 can be spent on, I think it's 30,000, correct?
$30,000 cap?
$30,000 cap for each individual project parcel. And
that would be for things like roof, tuck pointing, waterproofing the building?
Correct. And so the reason that the building division is involved, that they have the technical staff that will go out and do an evaluation of the building and determine what can be done to help mothball it.
So one fine point, is it intended that all of these would be LRA properties, or they might be broader than that?
I think they're all LRA properties.
I just wanted to clarify that for the sake of the people sitting at this table and for the record.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Questions?
I had a question.
Sure.
So the $750,000 that you're requesting now for economic development strategy, that is for you to be able to go into this next phase of the planning around the site?
Correct.
Okay, in those 5 specific neighborhoods?
In those 5 specific neighborhoods.
Other questions?
Well, I was wondering what your thoughts were in terms of this board being listed under SLDC, because it would seem to fit, that we would fit there.
Well, I'm not sure that it fits under SLDC, but I think if there's a spot that says economic development, that it would be one of those. I think what we do is we share that space with both the PDA, CDA, Affordable Housing Commission, and so we were just one of that family of economic development entities. So I don't think any one of them would like to be under me, at least under my page. So they each have an individual page. I think that we'll be looking to figure out a way to make sure that we all have links to what you all are doing.
Because I know I look under there, the Preservation Board, for example, and Planning Commission, and I think, well, not that it would be under your purview, I just mean in terms of how the website is organized.
What I try and do is make sure everyone knows that we all exist.
Right.
Okay, and so I think that's the case. We will make sure everybody knows that we exist.
Our role is an oversight role, and not a staff position or.
Right, and so, I understand your point. We can make sure that people are aware that this board is.
Thank you. Okay, any additional questions, comments, observations? Yes.
And there may be, and Todd may be going to address this, but as I'm not sure, on the city's website, there may be already a section for boards, because we don't just allocate money for SLDC, so I don't know that us going under SLDC, but there
And that's a good
is
point.
something that would say boards, and so we have an IT department that creates it for all our other entities that would put what we want on there. If it's your board members' pictures, your bio, how you were established, where we get our funds, all of that could be done easily.
I think you're about to get a response.
Chairman,
And-
there's a
and-
lot of order here, but
Todd, make sure you identify yourself so we know who you are.
Ultimately, the operations director, the guy that's kind of been putting this together a little bit, and I appreciate all your time. I've heard you loud and clear, and by the end of the week, we're going to have you in the web. Okay, we're going to figure out a spot. I am an old guy, and I'm not that bright, but we have people here. We will figure out where you belong.
We have
and we will-
people.
And we will share that with you by the end of the week, and you look at it and tell me if you need more. I don't like my mug on there, but if you would, we could do that.
Well, and just in
Okay.
terms of organization, like, for example, at one point, we had Jay, who was kind of like our liaison. So if there would be somebody whose job description included, like, okay, you are the liaison to this group.
Right.
So that we would have a go-to person, and
I will make a good run at it this week, and then we'll talk further. You all have my cell phone.
Late in the week, don't overcommit. Now,
By the
it's-
end of the
it's-
week,
it's-
I will have something out there.
All right.
Okay?
Yes. good.
Sorry for the interruption.
All right, thank you. It's not an interruption. All right, any additional questions or comments? I will then ask whether there is a motion to, oh, you have more to, yes?
I'd like to do two things.
Yes?
One is just find a piece of paper.
All right.
Two actually things. I'm about ready to knit things together like we haven't seen before. And then I need to talk about the CDA allocation. The knitting is, you just heard, the economic development strategy is just about ready to be released. I'm not as tall as Otis. Just about ready to be released. It will have some identification of areas of town where part of the toolbox from economics development should be focused. All of those places will be in neighborhoods. That will help us in our feeding as to how we, where we go and where we do the initial efforts of more detailed neighborhood planning. That's a factor into that. I smiled, April, as you talked about, and we talked about the Project Connect area and the neighborhoods that Otis mentioned, is what we're doing is updating the neighborhood plan for the neighborhoods of the Fifth Ward. So old plans from 20 years ago are going to be replaced. A great knitting. We've talked about the light rail as being an asset that's going to be, or the alternatives analysis will get us to a point where we will be implementing something as transit in a portion of our city. And then Otis mentioned something that's going on with Great Rivers Greenway, which is another piece of infrastructure to produce equitable development, as all of these are. Those are all sort of in this beauty base of where we're going to go with neighborhood planning. I've never seen something like this to be able to help us have a logic to where we go and what we do. Particularly, I'll reemphasize this point, because in the neighborhood planning, we're going to have a steady state so we can continue and continue. Which leads me to the last thing, is there is in my section here, an allocation to the Community Development Agency. That is two things, both exceedingly valuable. One is a $50,000 allotment to be working with neighborhoods to get them empowered and organized to help with a neighborhood planning effort. That's something that we're helping. The CDA has had a management change for them to understand, for the neighborhood stabilization officers to participate with, and then the St. Louis Community Foundation and others that are doing things in neighborhoods. So that's an important thing to help neighborhoods. I remember, Mr. Chairman, you asking specifically, some neighborhoods have more there than others to be able to do this. That's money to be able to help neighborhoods to do that. The $1 million, that is $1 million that's an allocation through this tax money to go towards implementing outcomes from the plan. meaning if there's something identified in the plan that funding sources are more elusive to, and it would be catalytic, that is $1 million pot on an annual basis that could go to improving the neighborhood according to the plan.
So the
Thank
point being that not only might there be a plan, but there would be resources available to implement at least pieces of a plan, so it doesn't just sit on a shelf.
Right. And, yes, and we all hope that there's resources, and they're all humble, and they all have maybe some more complicated strings, some of the federal ones. These, as all of you see that it's going to be administered by CDA, will come unencumbered by any of those federal strings that are normally used.
All right, excellent.
So,
Okay,
I have a
yes.
question on that. Nadine, you know you wasn't going to be able to say that without questions. So that's one you answered. So people would not have to go through all they go through now to access these funds like they do with block grant and home funds.
I'm going to say that a little differently.
You know the process now for any monies that you want to get through CDA?
Yeah, there's a little
which
gray
are
hair.
either
I know that
be-
process. Yeah.
Which are either going to be block grant or home funds. They
Right.
come with all the federal regulations. So we've heard long complaints about what it takes to access that money.
Yep.
You just said this won't have those. So who can apply for this money? How is this money
So I've been
going
listening to what you
to
said.
now?
There's two things. It will not have those strings. It will be housed in CDA, but it's to implement aspects of the plan, not a general all-call for money.
To implement,
Yes,
and you had said projects, he said, so plan just won't sit on the shelf. And so, one, you're starting with the pilot. You're talking about in the areas of the pilot program or everybody who has a plan?
I'm talking about this principle. Going forward, this money will be available to help be a resource to implement the plan so it doesn't sit on the shelf.
Which plan? Because we've
The
talked
plans that we're
about
doing
all-
through this program, which in my mind will include the West End.
So you talked the neighborhood plan.
The neighborhood plans, yes, the neighborhood plans.
And who will, when you talk about implementing things that come out the plan,
Uh-huh.
are those going to be developers that can apply for the money, neighborhood groups that can apply, or all of that you still have to work out? Because that's very important when we're talking about neighborhood plans and people find out there's a pot of money being created. People are going to want to know, how do we have an opportunity to use that, and who decides what we get to use it on?
The plan will be that roadmap. The money will not be allocated or available for something that has not come through the community-driven process to be something that's needed in that neighborhood. And that's the most fundamental part I can tell you about it.
Let me see if I
I'm
can help
saying
here.
after you've gotten there,
Yes,
the plan is complete, the chairman said, so the plan won't just sit on the shelf.
Right.
Everything you've described, I'm already taking consideration, that's completed.
right.
So once that's completed, and then how do we apply for those funds to implement the recommendations that have now come out of your plan? And I'm saying, maybe you haven't gotten there yet. I'm asking you, do you know that?
So I haven't gotten there in saying a certain amount of money, but I want to encourage us to get there, that what was going to be eligible for that money will have come through this planning process and be listed and articulated in the plan. It could be articulated quite specifically that a corner in the neighborhood is in dire need, or of some immediate access to capital to do something. There may be a streetscape, there may be a social service aspect, there may be a park aspect, all those type of things that come out of the plan.
I'd like to jump in. I think maybe there's a disconnect here, and I think what I'm hearing is perhaps an assumption that there would be availability of funds through an application to implement an aspect of the plan.
That's the
And
question, because
it
that's
occurs-
what, yeah, when you
it
talk
occurs
about
to me that might be-
implementation. Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to talk over you.
I'm sorry. No, I'm just saying, that's what I'm talking about.
That's
the
what I
if-
thought.
How you get to that.
But I think it is also likely, or certainly possible, that it would be a BPS project, that it would be that the plan identifies that the four corners of some intersection should be dressed up.
Right, and I think so, it seems all that still has to be, because
Exactly.
you will have to put some
It's just an availability
criteria.
of resources, and the distribution of those, or the allocation of those, is yet to be determined, because the details of the plans haven't even been determined.
Right, yes,
Okay.
yes, so that was my question, has that been determined, how you would access it?
And I think the answer is
Because
no.
once again,
The
we
answer
know
is-
as being accountable to the public, when money is sitting, people look and say, oh, look, you
course.
left this millions of dollars there, you don't even know what you're gonna do with it yet, or they start calling, especially when you have these meetings that people have access to almost immediately, what happened in the meeting, and you have a large amount of money sitting, and so people right away, with the need that we have out in these communities, want to know, what are you going to do, and how do we apply? And, we have plans and marching forward, so we're not at that point yet, it seems to
exactly.
put all that
Right.
together.
It's supposed to be the most synergistic money to be able to be the local match for something that might have another source of funds to it. It may even be in the neighborhood planning process, an open call to provide something in a portion of the neighborhood.
Yeah, I think it's many opportunities, and if it could be leveraged, that would be even better, that
And,
would be great.
Okay.
Yes, thank you, sir.
I want to be conscious of the time.
Sure.
And we still have more to do. So, any further questions or comments?
I do have one. I sometimes hear some of the aldermen talking about the fact that we have a lot of different incentives or ways that we can assist in development. And I've heard a desire to see a way that all of those could kind of be listed where if I want to do something in an area, I could see all the different ways that I could get assistance or things like that. Is something like that being developed to your knowledge?
So all those incentives, or the great majority of those incentives are administrated by SLDC. And twofold, it's available on their website. How organized it is, I'm not sure. But it's also an shot of the Equitable Economic Development Plan to help give a little bit more guidance as to how you use those incentives and maybe how you collectively target them. So,
Okay.
All right, thank you.
and I have one thing, Mr. Chairman, that I'll leave you as a homework.
All right, while you're distributing that, I'm going to proceed with the question of whether there is a motion to approve the request for $4,120,922 in the neighborhood revitalization category, item number 2 on today's agenda.
I do have a question. I know that on one page, I see $3,070,000, and then further along, I see $470,613, and then further along, under CDA, I see $1,050,000. Are those the figures that added together come up with your four?
Short answer, I believe, is yes. So there's a total of $3,070,922 to be added to with the CDA money.
Okay.
And the $3,070,922 should be the total of what Otis and I talked
Here's the 470, which translates to 643, so that's part of the 3,070,000.
Okay.
First line, yes.
So there's an
Well, no, but so you're saying that's just a sub-listing here
Yeah,
on
so
this
it's-
next page?
See right here, 470,613.
And then
Look
the-
right here at the top of your salaries on the page before.
And what about the $1,050,000?
The $1,050,000 is on the third page.
All right, so I mean, that's what gets added in, the $1,050,000 to the three,
Yes,
yeah, the $1,050,000.
those two
about.
numbers.
50 is on a
Yep.
very simple page.
Right, right.
And the 3 million is on this full
Right.
page.
Right.
So that's how we get the 4,000,001. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Then it's a slight difference, and I thought maybe that's what you're talking about. At the top, it says $4,125,000 for this category of neighborhood revitalization. But as you go down below for neighborhood revitalization, it says $4,120,922. So
The
I'm not
official
sure what
request
that
is
position-
$4,120,000. That's what we're going to be acting on. If there is a mistake in somebody's arithmetic, that's up to them to figure out, to adjust afterwards. But the allocation The allocation request is
That's
clear.
the estimate, okay.
4,129,22 is correct.
Correct.
Right.
All right, so I ask again whether there is a motion to approve that funding request.
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I will call the question. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed.
There is one vote opposed. And the motion carries. Thank you. Thank you, Don. And we finally move to item number 4, public safety infrastructure.
Good morning. My name is Jimmy Edwards. I am the Director of Public Safety for the City of St. Louis. Mr. Chairman and members, thank you very much for your consideration of the public safety request for infrastructure. Our total request is in the amount of $2,350,000. There are 4 items that make up this request. The first is for 911 service. The 911 service is a renewable contractual requirement of the City of St. Louis in the amount of $300,000. The second is for the city emergency operation that has been stood up and has been expanded. I'm happy to report that we now have the ability through that program to inform city residents and anyone else that might be traveling in the city via hotline, cell line, text messages, emails, social media platforms of any emergencies that may be occurring. It also hosts the Amber Alert. The third request is for LPR cameras, LPR and cameras. LPR means license plate readers and cameras. Equitable policing is critically important in the city of St. Louis. We have been informed by crime analytics with respect to ingress and egress and the travel of people that have committed crimes in and out of our cities. Historically, all of the aldermen have been required to utilize their capital funds in order to have erected various cameras in their particular wards. Some of those cameras most of those cameras that were erected by aldermen are what we call highly visible cameras. You may have seen those cameras. They're the red blinking light cameras that you see throughout the city. Some cameras, however, are what we call police-sensitive cameras. Those cameras are not highly visible cameras. We do have many of those cameras, and all of those cameras are federated into our real-time crime center. However, many neighborhoods, especially those neighborhoods in marginalized communities and our minority communities in North City, did not have cameras. And so we took it upon ourselves to make sure that that equitable policing included areas like Baden, areas like the Riverview Circle, areas that are north of downtown, to ensure that those areas were policed with our technology. Technology is important to policing. It allows for us to hopefully deter policing, as well as it is one of the biggest investigative tools that we have inside of the police department. Utilizing technology in light of the lack of having a fully staffed police department has been very, very helpful to keep our community safe. So respectively, 911, we're asking for $300,000. For our notification, we're asking for $100,000. We asked for those same amounts last year because they are renewable contractual amounts. We're asking for $350,000 to assist with LPR and cameras. We have also a public safety answering point. Now, this public safety answering point was a matter that we first brought to the attention of this board last year. Last year, you were kind enough to provide us with the initial funds of $3,160,000 in order to create the design for a new public safety answering point. Just to reiterate, that public safety answering point will allow police, fire, our emergency operation folk and others to come together under one roof in order to be able to respond to 911 calls and other emergencies in the city of St. Louis. We have an emergency in the city of St. Louis and all over this country right now. We are standing up now our emergency operations center inside of the police department to address COVID, which means that we bring, for example, our healthcare professionals inside of that facility, our police, our fire, and others, so that we're able to communicate accurately to the public of what's going on, for example, with COVID-19. I would like to provide the board with an update and the progress of the Public Safety Answering Point project. And we will tell you where we are with respect to the next steps as it relates to this project. However, before I ask Jared to come up and join me with respect to that update, the request with respect to our PSAP financing to you today is $1,600,000. Those four projects together would add up to the amount of $2,350,000.
Thank you, Judge Edwards. My name is Jarek Czernikiewicz. I am Chief Engineer for the Design Division of the Board of Public Service at the Department of the President, and we are responsible for contract management for consulting services. The purpose of this presentation is to provide you an update of the status of the project and provide a background to which you might want to take into consideration.
Thank you.
The Public Safety Answering Point will be a new state-of-the-art emergency operations centers combining police, fire, emergency, medical services dispatch, as well as City Emergency Management Agency and Citizen Service Bureau. The consolidated center will be constructed and operated according to the current standards of National Fire Protection Association and Incident Command Center. The proposed facility will serve city's current needs and will also be designed to accommodate any expansion that is needed in the future. I will provide you a project timeline to date so you have a better overview. In 2008, the city commissioned a study to review the economic, operational, and technical feasibility of forming a joint intra-city communications center. Specific recommendations were issued and guidelines for successful consolidation of the operations were presented. These recommendations included the construction of the new state-of-the-art PSAP facility. Today, the Economic Development Tax Board approved a total of $3.8 million towards this project. We issued a request for qualifications in April 2019, received 4 statements of qualifications from firms that are qualified to perform the job. And upon review of statement of qualifications, 2 best qualified firms were invited for the interviews, for an interview. A team led by FGM Architects was selected in July 2019. Initial presentations to the stakeholders of the project by the selected team was performed in August 2019. The consulting services for the project will be performed in 4 distinct phases. Phase 1, feasibility study, which is currently underway, includes information gathering from each agency to develop specific recommendations for facility network infrastructure, size, and any design criteria to proceed with final design. The consultant will work with each agency to incorporate all suggestions and needs of each agency as possible. The consultant will conduct site interviews, survey each agency's procedure, protocols, and develop specific design criteria. Phase 2 of the services will include final design and preparation of construction bid documents, which provide a basis for bidding the project. Phase 3 will cover call handling system procurement and implementation. Those are the services that are needed in support of new and upgraded call handling system. That includes design, software, hardware, licensing, installation, launch, and on-site user training. Phase 4 will be computer-aided dispatch system procurement and implementation, and will also involve similar services as call handling system. That means design, software, hardware, licensing, installation. Contract negotiations for Phase 1 and Phase 2, which includes planning, design, and preparation of construction documents, were completed in November 2019. And the notice to proceed for Phase 1 feasibility study was issued in January. Once the Phase 1 is completed, the consultant will present a draft report to the city, and upon review by each agency, Phase 2 will be authorized. That means preparation of construction bid documents will be authorized once the Phase 1 planning and programming is approved. As far as project schedule is concerned, feasibility study will be completed in the third quarter of 2020 and submitted to review and approval. The preparation of construction bid documents and procurement process will be completed by the end of 2021. We anticipate notice to proceed for construction be issued early spring of 2022. Construction of the facility will take approximately 18 months. Move-in will begin in the fall of 23, and the switch-over process will be complete in the second quarter of 2024. Based on the information received to date, we estimate the anticipated total cost of the project will be about $29 million. We are kindly requesting $1.6 million in funding necessary for the continuation of the project. With this, I can answer any questions.
Just to amplify just a bit on PSAP, we have a working group that reviews and it meets regularly with respect to the progress. That working group comprises members of the police department, the fire department, a person in my office co-chairs the working group to make sure that we are on time with respect to the timelines that are set out. I welcome your comments, I welcome your questions, along with our engineer with respect to anything that you may have as it relates to the infrastructure requests of public safety.
Thank you. Questions?
I have a question. So part of this is for capital, and so that goes to the city's capital committee, and they make decisions on how to...
With respect to LPRs or with respect to PSAP?
Okay.
That's the next category. That's the next category.
Okay. So that's
All separate from this.
okay. Well, then on the cameras, is part of the cost of putting these cameras in having fiber available?
Yes, that's been a major problem, unfortunately, in the North St. Louis area that I use as an example. No fiber, no electricity, no bandwidth, having to do that infrastructure work. And I just want to give an opportunity to compliment BPS and others that have gone out to do that work. When we start to look around and we realize that we are not as tech relevant as we should be.
Because that would make it really impossible for you to say what the cost of implementing a given camera is, because it depends on what resources are available. It's not just the cost of the camera.
Absolutely.
It's everything that's necessary to make the camera operational.
Absolutely.
Okay, okay. You know, looking at the number you're asking for, I almost think, is that enough?
Well, I'll probably be back next year.
Okay.
Additional questions? I have one, and that
Yes.
is, has there been any discussion or consideration given to the question of whether, or what the ultimate capacity of the Real-Time Crime Center is?
You know, I would love to expand the capacity of the Real-Time Crime Center. I just don't have the personnel to do so. We have the ability to expand. We would have to do a lot of work in terms of adding additional infrastructure, but we do have the ability and the capacity to expand.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any additional comments or questions? All right, then I will ask once again whether there is a motion to approve the request for $2,350,000 as itemized in item number 4, public safety infrastructure on the draft proposal. Is there such
So
a-
moved.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. Motion and a second. Is there discussion? I will call the question. All in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. Dwyer. Thank you, members.
Thank you. Now, there's an item number 5 on this document that I do not see on the agenda, City Infrastructure Capital Fund, $2,110,000.
Yeah, the last item is, under the ordinance, it automatically moves over to the capital committee. And it's put in the citywide capital, and then there's a committee that votes on how to spend that. That's like an automatic. It doesn't require your vote or that type of
I
stuff.
see. That's why it's not on the agenda.
Yeah, it's outlined in the ordinance like that.
Got it. Thank you. Yes.
Is that the fund that the committee that meets up in BPS of different people come together and have to go through all the projects, or is that go to the alderman and the money they split up?
No, this is separate citywide capital money that is done by a board that's outlined by ordinance as well. The CDA director sits on it. There's a rep from the Board of Aldermen. There's also the head of the Streets Committee, I believe, sits on it from the Board of Aldermen. The budget director, President Bradley, myself representing the mayor. There's a comptroller rep on there. It's about 10 or 11 people that sit on that capital committee that make these
Did they
decisions.
used to meet up in BPS?
Yeah, they meet in
Okay.
BPS.
I was
That meeting
on
is,
there before.
it's scheduled for about a week or two from now, the next
on
10
the
days or
25th.
so.
It's the same one.
Yes.
I've been to some of those meetings. I was just wondering, is that the same group, or is this the part where the aldermen go and split
So
it?
that group looks at, bridges and fire equipment, trash trucks, building improvements, HVAC in buildings, whatever's out there. They analyze all the big stuff.
The big
They may wind up using that money for a lease purchase, to borrow money for 8 years to buy a fleet of trash or snow plows or something like that. Everything's on the board with them. It's all big stuff typically that takes, they'll have a 10-year life. They don't look more short-term for, throwaway items, if you would, 3 to 5 year stuff.
Say those projects are large, and the 2 million doesn't go far in those meetings, because like you said, just one bridge, we might have to save, when I was in those meetings, multiple years just to
Right.
replace one bridge that is in critical condition. So-
One bridge could be $25 million.
Exactly.
That's why we are so good about applying for grants that pay 80%, so you get a local match here. And you're very correct, it takes 5-6 years by the time you start a bridge till the time you complete it. So currently, today, we have about 10 we're working on out of 73.
Wow. Okay.
So, Mr. Chair, a question then, as far as the PSAP, is the money that's being allocated toward that, is that in preparation of then, when we're constructing it, there will be a bond issue that people will vote on, or are we dedicating funds to pay a debt service?
The tone would be to go out and borrow and utilize this money to pay the debt service, to go out and do a 20-year loan and commit 1.5 or 1.6 million to this each year to pay that off. Okay. I think today we just heard the refined number. We started out in the low 20s, we're at 29, and the president and his man are pretty solid on that number now. So we got something we can use. So that's the goal of it.
Thank you.
I want to say thanks. I know we're all in weird times here and that, but I really appreciate you all stepping out and coming up and doing this, keeping government moving. It's important. So I just want to say thanks, and we'll get that website put on there.
Thank you for setting up the room as you did, so that we are practicing what we're responsible for doing in these times. And
Yes.
So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
All right, any other business to come before the board today? Hearing none, I would be happy to entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Second, third,
Good.
fourth.
That motion was just approved unanimously. We are adjourned.
Great job.